Hey, everybody. I'm back again. Did you miss me? I'll bet you did. Okay, today's presentation is on Chapter 11, Social Stratification. I'm going to start with a quote by George Orwell. Who was he? George Orwell. Didn't he write 1984? Indeed, he did, which should be required reading for every American. I'm not kidding. Read the book. It's amazing. You will have so many insights into some of the negative things taking place today. Uh, Things like where he talked about double speak, where a word has two simultaneously opposing meanings. You see it all the time in politics, double speak. Um, and he also talked about in 1984, which was a totalitarian society. I will talk more about George Orwell later. Anyway, he also wrote Animal Farm. In it, he said, all the animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow said, in this world, a man must be either a hammer or an anvil. Oliver Wendell Holmes said, I have no respect for the passion for equality, which seems to me to be merely idealizing envy. Well, the text opens up, this chapter, I should say, opens up with a description of the sinking of the Titanic. Well, why? Because this is about social stratification, hierarchies in society, upper class, middle class, lower class. And so you'll remember the Titanic, the people who were the poorest, the lower class, were at the bottom of the boat in terms of that's where they resided, and actually had like blocks to prevent them from going up in the upper decks and mingling with the upper class people, because after all, the upper class people didn't want to have to deal with the riffraff, many of which they couldn't open in time. And that's why so many of the lower class died, because when they hit the iceberg, it gashed the boat at the bottom. And anyway, so as an example, of the first class, 60% were saved because they were at the top of the ship. Second class, 36% were saved, kind of in the middle of the ship. And at the bottom, the third class, only 24% were saved. Just like the world today, the upper class, most are saved, and the bottom class, most are not saved. I think the other interesting thing about the Titanic is everybody says, well, there weren't enough lifeboats. Well, of the first 6 lifeboats that went out, none of them were filled to capacity. The first one, only 45% was filled to capacity, similar to the second one. The 5th lifeboat, only 20% was filled to capacity. Of the first 6 lifeboats, only one, the 4th lifeboat, was filled to even 83% capacity. Now you remember too, there was much nobility in terms of men giving up their lifeboat seat to a woman or a child first, because that was the idea. But then there was supposedly a guy who dressed up as a woman in order to get on the lifeboat. Personally, whenever I travel, I always have a few dresses along, because you never know what the occasion's going to demand, and bring along my high heel. Perhaps I've said too much. Forget I said any of that. Anyway, so the question was, many of these men were chivalrous in giving up their lives for a woman or a child. Would men today be this chivalrous? Well, when the movie came out, which I think was like in the late 90s, they had a survey to see, would men today be this chivalrous? Okay, now think, what would be your prediction? Okay, here we go. The survey found that 65% of men today would not give up their seat for a woman or a child. 65% would not. 67% of men would not give up their seat for their own spouse. Yeah, I get that. That's only slightly higher than the divorce rate, which is around 50%. You figure, okay, for the other 70%, they probably don't want to live with that person anyway. So, but here's my favorite one. 54% of men would not give up their lifeboat seat for their own mother. That's right, their own mother. It's sort of like, Ma, you've had a good run. Now, you get up there and sing Near to God with me, here to God with me, with the band, and I'll be rowing on with my life. Oh, men. Okay. Well, you need to know, starting at page 281, you need to know about social stratification. Again, think about like the mountain behind me. We see the different rock layers, the strata. That's how society is. Like looking at the side of the cliff and seeing all the rock layers. A system by which a society ranks categories of people in a hierarchy, as in more or less. 4 basic principles. Number 1, it is a trait of society, not simply a reflection of individual differences. It's an aspect, a structural aspect of society. 2, it persists over generations. Going back to colonial times, we had poverty in American cities. 3, it's universal but variable. And I know you know what that means now. It means it's found in all societies, but how it functions in each society varies from society to society. Universal, but variable. And finally, it involves not just inequality, but is supported by patterns of belief. In other words, there's a rationale for why society is arranged in this hierarchy. Researchers Retina, Form, and Pease found that while most Americans recognize considerable opportunity in America, those in the higher social classes saw society as more open than those with fewer privileges did. At all levels, whites perceived more opportunity than blacks did. The researchers concluded that beliefs supporting stratification are embraced most by those who benefit the most from the system. Kind of makes sense. So if you're wealthy, it's like, well, everybody can make it in this country. I can't imagine what your problem is. And if you're poor, you're going, I can't get a break. How? I don't have the opportunities in order to move up. Caste and class systems are then described in the text, but we're going to move right on to a blend of caste and class, which is on page 284, the British aristocracy. It's an example of, remember this from the first exam, ascription and achievement. Ascribe status, you're born with it, or it's something that you have no say over as time goes on, like you become a teenager or you're born a female. Whereas achievement means, hey, it's whatever you achieved in society is your status. Now, why I'm going over this is because this system was kind of transposed over into the United States as we became a British colony. The British aristocracy is a key aspect of this mixed system of caste and class, ascription and achievement. Aristocracy is from the Greek root word aristoi, meaning the best people. Elite Greeks took this meaning rather literally, as did most of the hereditary nobility of medieval Europe. Excuse me. In other words, the aristocracy in Europe, medieval Europe, thought they were better people than the rest. Give you an example of how much wealth they accumulated. Queen Victoria, she was in England. Queen Victoria's estate was estimated at about 45 million upon her death in 1901. That's a lot of money. That's billions in today's money. And some of it was in the form of slum housing in London. That's right. Queen Victoria was making money off the slums. Yeah, she was like what, the slum queen in terms of, like if you had some trouble with the plumbing, who do you call up? The slum lady, the slum landlord lady. Is she going to come down and help you out, Queen Victoria? Okay. To show you how things have changed, J.K. Rowling, I know you know who she was, and is worth twice that of Queen Elizabeth. So the aristocracy no longer are the richest in society. However, again, don't get too excited about material possessions. The Chinese poet Li Bi said, all wealth and power are like clouds passing by. Cling to nothing. Um, okay, let's go back to the founding of this country. The founding of this country was going to be initially a single uh, uh, unit to determine a single chamber of Congress, I should say. That's actually still the case in, I believe it's Nebraska, but every other state has both a House and a Senate. So originally it was just going to be one. And the small colonies at the time all complained and said, yeah, but see, if you just have a Senate, if you just have a House and it's by proportion to the population, then those states with the most population will always be controlling what goes in the colonies. And we don't feel that's fair. And so the smaller colonies argued we have to have two chambers, one a Senate where there's equal representation. And so that's exactly what the system was in in England, where you had parliaments divided into the Lords, which is like our Senate, and the Commons, which is like our House. And the Lords, the only difference is the Lords is more of a figurehead kind of chamber, and all the action in Parliament is done by the House. The Lords, up until the year 2000, to be a Lord, to be in their version of the Senate, you had to be able to trace your lineage to the royal family, that you had royal blood. But that became increasingly difficult over the years, so they just sort of waived that requirement. The Commons, think of the term commoners, they're elected proportionate to their population that they represent. So here in the United States, though, the Senate's not a figurehead like the Lord's chamber is in the Parliament. The Senate is the most important. Think about it. There's only 100 senators. They only have to run every 6 years for office. So they can do all kinds of things and people forget within 6 months. Whereas people in the House, which are elected proportion to their population in the state, they got to run every 2 years, and there's 450 of them, 435 of them, something like that. And they are much less privileged members in Washington. So the Senate is the traditionally upper class body. If you look at what's going to happen with Supreme Court nominations, for example, it's solely up to the Senate. The House has nothing to say about it. When it came to impeachment, only two presidents have been impeached in recent memory, Clinton and Trump. And you're going to say, no, he wasn't impeached. Yes, he was. Both were impeached by the House, but when it went to the Senate refused to go along with the impeachment. All righty. In many class societies, the aristocracy view the bourgeois, remember the bourgeois are the capitalists, they view the bourgeois as vulgar. The bourgeois insisted that through economic success, they accumulated great wealth, that this sheer possession of money should place them among the aristocracy. Okay, so here's what's going down. When feudalism breaks down in the Middle Ages and individual entrepreneurs begin to rise in the cities and eventually across the countryside, people were able to accumulate great amounts of wealth. Okay, so you're seeing the transition from feudalism to what was called mercantilism, like merchants, onto capitalism. And so this is the case in England. And so mercantilism was just a form of capitalism. So as capitalism evolves, in capitalism, your power is associated with your wealth. Think about it. The more money you have, the more you can do in society. For example, every now and then you'll see somebody is hired as a hitman to kill somebody's sig other or something. And it's not really expensive. For a few thousand, you can get a hitman, you know? And so imagine what you can do when you have millions and billions of dollars, the amount of power you wield in society. Now, under feudalism, the nobility had all the power. But under capitalism, it has nothing to do with your proximity to the throne. It has to do with whether or not you got money. So the rising bourgeois, the capitalists are all saying to the nobility, oh, we are more powerful than you are, at least just as powerful as you are. Well, the aristocracy saw this as vulgarity, that money can never count as much as noble birth, family virtue, personal honor, and proximity to the throne. This vulgarity was morally shocking as much as it was politically threatening. In other words, they knew it was true. So, meaning politically threatening, meaning that they were losing their power in society to this new rising class of capitalist rich. So I said this was all lead into how it is in the United States. We see the same distinction in the United States today between the people who we call the blue bloods, the old money in America, and the nouveau riche, the people who have earned money in this lifetime. The blue bloods have more social cachet than do the people who just accumulate money in this lifetime, like Elon Musk or Bezos or Gates. Okay. Figure 11-1 shows economic inequality in selected countries. You notice that the US is second highest in that. That may be dated. I think we have the highest economic inequality today, but check out the chart. Okay, ideology. Think of the word idea. Ideology are cultural beliefs. Ideology is cultural beliefs that justify particular social arrangements, including patterns of inequality. Justify them. Now, it's not simply a matter of self-serving ideas generated by privileged people in a deliberate manner to justify the fact that they're rich. It's more a matter of cultural patterns that deem certain social arrangements as fair, that certain categories of people are justly entitled to privileges that are denied to others. So it's not unfair, it's just, it's reasonable. It's how society's set up. To give you an example, religion has often historically been an ideological foundation for social stratification. We'll explore this more when we get to the chapter on religion. But to give you an example, here's Queen Elizabeth's actual title, and you can imagine her wearing this name tag. It'd be hanging down to her waist. It is, wait, I need a deep breath. Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, of the United Kingdom of Great Britain, Northern Ireland, and of her other realms and territories, Queen, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith. You know, in that, the Queen and I have something in common. I too am defender of the faith, but it's a different faith. Aristotle, you know, now let me start off with, have you ever seen any video of Aristotle? No, huh? Do you know why? Yeah, he was around way before this video. So I'm going to do an Aristotle impersonation. And the sad part is you will have no idea just how accurate this actually is. This is from his famous book, Politics. He said, "But is there anyone thus intended by nature to be a slave, and for whom such a condition is expedient and right? Or rather is all slavery a violation of nature? There is no difficulty in answering this question on grounds of both reason and of fact, for that some should rule and others be ruled is a thing not only necessary, but expedient. From the hour of their birth, some are marked out for subjection, others for rule." Aristotle, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you. Aristotle, thank you very much. Thank you for that applause. Thank you, Aristotle. It's acting, folks. Plato, not Play-Doh, Plato, on the other hand, argued, where there is voluntary agreement, there is justice about who should have what. Every culture considers some type of inequality fair. So, since every society has some kind of social stratification, ideology may be described as the assertions that specific kinds of inequality should not be defined as injustice. For example, regarding the two sexes, while inequality among men has been viewed as a matter of class-like individual merit, the subordination of women has been defended on the basis of caste-like duty and natural order. Interestingly, most U.S. adults, I always say interestingly because you may think, I don't find it interesting, but okay. Interestingly or not, you be the judge. Most U.S. adults claim inequality based on race is wrong, while at the same time claim that economic inequality is mostly right because some people have more talent and training and make more effort than others. John Adams, who is he? That's right, patriot. Not a patriot, meaning the football team. He was one of the original patriots. Second president of the United States. Was he the beard dude? No, that was his brother, Sam Adams. That was his cousin. I'm sorry, it's not brother, it was his cousin. And it was Sam Adams who led the Boston Tea Party, where they got on the ship and threw off all the tea because, you know, the colonists were being taxed unfairly. That was his brother. Anyway, John Adams. So question is, what did the founding fathers have to say about this, or at least one of them? He said that all men are born to equal rights is true, but to teach that all men are born with equal powers and faculties, to equal influence in society, to equal property and advantages through life is gross fraud. So yes, we're all created equal, and then from that point on, you're on your own. Okay, so the ideology is this. Let me give you a prime example. In fact, I think I mentioned this in the first presentation, is if you look at, and this is going to be the focus of our next chapter, if you look at poverty in the United States, is it unfair? Okay, so there's 40 to 50 million people living in poverty. Now, and I'm oversimplifying this, but from a conservative perspective, it's not unfair, because the opportunities are there for all in America. This is an equal opportunity country, is the theory or the ideal. And therefore, if people who are poor, it's because they're not taking advantage of the opportunities that are there for a variety of reasons, but it's on them. See, because this is the American dream. Anybody can achieve it. And many of people have been poor and have achieved it. And so if you're poor and you're not achieving it, it's on you. You're meriting what you're getting in life. And then obviously the rich have the greatest merit because they have achieved the most. From a liberal standpoint, we're going to look at the same 40 million people who are poor, 50 million people who are poor, and say, well, no, see, there is not equal opportunity in America. The opportunities available become more available the higher you go up the income scale. So there's all kinds of opportunities available to the rich, but those same opportunities aren't available to the poor. So going back to the example I gave you in the previous presentation, was the poor family living in Appalachia. There are no jobs nearby. It's like, well, get a job. There are no jobs. All the coal mines have closed because coal mining is no longer a profitable way to produce electricity. And so coal is no longer, most of the coal in the United States now is not used in the US. It's shipped over to China. And so there's nothing you can do to stop this because it is much more profitable and cheaper for electric companies to use natural gas than it is to use coal. So anyway, they ain't got jobs. How are they going to get jobs? There are no opportunities available to them, and so they live in poverty. Okay, so my point being, it's the same 40 million people who are poor. From a liberal standpoint, it's unfair, and from a conservative standpoint, it's perfectly fair. That's the ideology. The US system has elements of what's called a meritocracy. Think of the word merit, where rewards are matched to personal merit as prizes to be given for personal achievement. This again applies that inequality is not necessarily the same as injustice. Ben Franklin, remember him? Yep. Another patriot. Franklin's stove, glasses, kite key experiment. He organized the first post office, Poor Richard's Almanac. He was ambassador to France. He was one of the leading thinkers behind the development of the Declaration of Independence, on and on and on. He was also quite the ladies' man when he was in France. Anyway, he said, a penny saved is a penny earned. He who gets all he can honestly and saves all he gets will certainly become rich. Again, showing what a meritocracy America is. Adam Smith wrote Wealth of Nations, which is sort of the ideology that best explains capitalism. We'll talk more about that when we get to the chapter on the economy. He said, the difference of natural talents in different men is in reality much less than we are aware of. The difference between a philosopher and a street porter, for example, arises not so much from nature as from habit, custom, and education. In other words, you get what you want in life because you merit it, you achieve it, it's available to all. Alexis de Tocqueville wrote Democracy in America. For some years, I remember a professor at Lafayette who was teaching Sociology 100 would use this as a textbook, even though it was written in the 1850s. Now, he was counting on the fact that students would never even notice that it was written in the 1850s. It's enough you got to get the damn book. But he would use it because so many of what de Tocqueville was a French philosopher, historian who tramped about the United States and just studied our democracy. And many of his observations sound like he made them yesterday, even though he made these over 120 years ago, 30 years ago. And so that's why the social professor at Lafayette would use this as one of his required texts. He said, de Tocqueville said, nothing is more customary in man than to recognize superior wisdom in the person of his oppressor. I used to think that too until Trump became president. Hey, for all you Trump fans, just a little joke. We got to make fun of them all, you know. I saw a political cartoon the other day about Joe Biden, and it had him sitting across the table from his wife, and it had him reading a prompter that said, honey, can you please pass me the tea? He made fun of both there. Okay, you need to know about, on page 289, the functions of social stratification, the structural functional analysis. This gets us to the Davis-Moore thesis. Yes, that's two people who created this thesis. They created it in 1945. Think of the time frame right at the end of World War II. That's World War II, the big war, 50 million people died. Whole world was in war. It's not Arabic number 2, it's Roman numeral World War II. United States, Germany, Hitler, ring a bell? Nah. Yeah. They argued that some type of social stratification is a social necessity and has beneficial consequences for society. People must be motivated with high social rewards to take on the training and added responsibility of occupational positions deemed important to society. Why? Because there's a limited talent pool. This gets people to work hard, better, and longer at these particular jobs. So it's a purposeful system of differential rewards. So the argument here is, hey, not everybody can be a nuclear physicist or a brain surgeon. And so some people have unique intellectual gifts. And so how do you get these people with unique individual gifts to take on these jobs, these particular jobs? And so you have to offer them high rewards. So the argument is those jobs in society that are most valuable to society earn the highest rewards, in this case, money, and possibly fame and status as well. Davis and Moore's thesis suggests that agrarian societies have little productive specialization and thus do not have to provide differential rewards to the mass of commoners. Such societies, however, demand persistence, thus loyalty in performing one's duty, carry the reward of honor. So you see this again. Many farmers farm because they love doing it, and the fact that they're producing food, of course they want to make a living, but they struggle, and it's a struggle to be a small farmer in America today, but they do it anyway because they love doing it, and because they feel like it's rewarding unto itself. A good day's work is reward unto itself. Davis and Moore argue that societies become more productive as they approach meritocracy, which literally is a Latin term meaning worthy of praise. They also argue that in meritocracies like the United States, some rewards are based on caste-like bases, such as family members being favored whether they deserve it or not. This is due to the social need for cohesion or stability. So the theory here is, you might want to take advantage of this, is that, hey, your parents will give you money whether you deserve it or not. So here's the key. Those of you who are living in the res halls, you don't want, your parents miss you. So you want to make them feel needed by frequently, not too frequently, you know when too much is too much. Tell them you need money. Hey, it's great to hear of you. Could you send me some money? I need some money. Could you give me some money? Could you put some money in an account? I need money. Now, if they ask you, you're not going to use this money to party or anything, are you? Go, no, I need more school supplies. You don't know how these professors are. They just keep adding it on. See, and they'll give you the money whether you deserve it or not, because you're family. If I have a fault, it's that I care too much in trying to help you. I don't, but if I had one, that would be my fault. The caring professor. The Davis-Moore thesis suggests the reason stratification exists. It does not state what rewards a society should give to any occupational position or how unequal the reward should be. It merely points out that positions a society considers more important must offer enough rewards to draw talented people away from less important work. Well, following this section, there's coverage in your text of how does this play out in American society. Now, this wasn't always in this particular text. This only started to appear in some recent editions. Long before that, the living legend on the cutting edge of education would do this same exercise in class that eventually appears in the text. So let's go through this. The argument again, and we can't do a discussion, so I'll pretend we're having one. And as much as I talk, it's hard to get a word in edgewise anyway, so what's the difference? Anyway, so the argument is those jobs in society that are most valuable to society should get and do get the highest rewards. Let's see if that's true in American society, shall we? So follow my logic, please. Let's take a job that saves people's lives. Now, my thinking is, see, if we don't save people's lives, there'll be no society. So saving people's lives has always been a highly valued job in society. So who saves people's lives? Do I have some suggestions? Yes. Doctors. Yes, that's a good one. Doctors. Okay, do doctors make a lot of money? Some doctors make more money than others. The doctors who make the most money are the specialists. And that's so true that in medical schools today, it's become very difficult to get people to be just general practice physicians. They all want to be specialists and earn the big money. And yet general practice physicians are the most important to the healthcare system because they're the gatekeepers into the system itself. First, you see your primary care physician, and then only then, if you need a specialist, you go to a specialist. And it's also the primary care physicians who are your gateway into the hospitals if you need medical care. Certainly so are the specialists, but you always start with your primary care physician. Anyway, so what specialists make the most money? Which physician specialists make the most money? A lot of people would think it's anesthesiologists, and they do make a lot of money because it's so lawsuit prone. They have to also carry a hefty insurance. I talked to one anesthesiologist, it's probably up from this amount now. This was a few years ago, and he told me he has to shell out 200,000 a year in malpractice insurance. That's a lot of overhead right off the bat. So you notice when you go to anesthesiologists, they don't want to give you powerful anesthesiology unless they have to. They're starting to use more and more of the twilight medicine and so forth because it's less risky. So better for you, better for them in terms of lawsuits. What else? The physicians that make the most, the specialists that make the most are plastic surgeons, right? Think about it. In most cases, it's elective surgery. You only get health insurance covered plastic surgery if you've been in some sort of an accident, so other than that, it's like, celebrities all the time saying, hey, I want to get a new nose. In fact, I want to look like this person. Or average people saying, I want to look like this celebrity, fix my nose, fix my lips, whatever, give me plastic surgery. So they're the ones who make the most money. I also talked to a person who is a dermatologist, and he said it's the best one to be in. He said because you never get called in over the weekend to come to an emergency. Like, when does everybody say, oh my God, I got this rash, it's an emergency, meet me in the ER immediately? It just doesn't happen. Okay, so doctors save people's lives. Who else saves people's lives? How about nurses? Right? Many of you want to become a nurse. Okay, well, I'm sure you already realize nurses, it's hard work. And I'll tell you a little something you'll find out in the nursing program is a lot of times you're covering up for the doctor's mistakes. Yes, doctors make mistakes. Why do you think it's called medical practice, not perfect? Yes, they make mistakes. So a lot of times the nurses are covering it for it. So particularly when you're working in an acute care setting like a hospital, you may be working 12-hour shifts and you are just rolling up and down the hall like crazy trying to keep up with it all. Why? Because the patients who don't get the word patient means literally be patient, are constantly hitting that button thinking they're at the hotel. Yeah. So anyway, think about it. The best patient is the one who's most comatose. If you're a nurse anyway, because it doesn't require that much attention. So anyway, yeah, it's hard work. You're covering up for the doctors, and you got to be careful you don't make a mistake. That's why you got, Maynard, why do you care if we don't cite the page numbers or whatever in the personal opinion statements? Because you can't afford to make mistakes when you're a nurse. If you make mistakes like that now, you can't pay attention to details. What the hell are you going to do when you're filling a hypodermic needle or something? Well, it was close. I almost had it right. Nevertheless, he just died. Okay, so nurses save people's lives all the time, and look at the nurses on with the pandemic right now, risking their own lives, in the process, and working ridiculous hours when COVID-19 hit its peak, and let's hope we don't reach another peak and overload hospitals again. So they're out there risking their lives for us as well. And yet, what are you going to earn? Middle-class wages. That's it. And yet you're saving people's lives. Okay, who else saves people's lives? How about mental health professionals, social workers, crisis intervention workers, middle-class wages, and they're talking people out of suicide, perhaps. Who else saves people's lives? How about EMTs? A lot of them, it's volunteer. Like where I live, these are volunteers who go out there and save people's lives right there at the highway, or they rush into your house and somebody's in cardiac arrest and they save your life on the way to the hospital. And it's, maybe minimum wage, maybe a little bit better than that. And a lot of times it's volunteer work. So clearly saving people's lives has nothing to do with rewards in society other than doctors. Okay. Who else saves people's lives? And this is a special category. Like the nurses we just described in the front lines during the pandemic, you also have police and firefighters and military personnel who risk their lives while they're saving other people's lives. And what do these people make? Middle-class wages. You say, Well, I know a detective in New York City, and he or she makes $90,000. That's right, but what's the cost of living in New York City? See, it's all relative to the cost of living. That's why you see 5% of the population here in the Valley works in New York City, but lives here where the cost of living is cheaper. I wouldn't want that commute every day, but hey, it's worth it to them in terms of how much money they're making relative to the cost of living here in the Valley. Okay, and how about military personnel? Here's one of the shameful things about our military, and I've talked to many veterans who have confirmed this is the case. They were living on the base with their families, and given the pay they were getting, they were living in poverty. That's right, living in poverty, even though they were living with subsidized housing and other benefits by living on the base. Meanwhile, they're risking their lives for us and going to war and coming back scarred, and if they come back alive, come back with PTSD or they're physically maimed. Anyway, and they're doing it all for us on not even middle class wages. Now, meanwhile, the admirals and the generals, I'm not kidding you, they are very wealthy, and some have mansions and have servants. Meanwhile, the GIs who are out there doing all the frontline work in the battlefield are paid like dirt. Okay, who else saves people's lives? How about farmers? Without food, without farmers, we ain't got food. So that's a high value job in society. And we already talked a little bit about farmers. The number of farmers since the year 1900 has simply plummeted because it's really, really hard to stay in farming and make a living. And so when a family farmer who is now in his 70s or 80s, that family, the kids don't want to continue the farming, they just sell to a developer, and that's the end of the family farm. And it's really hard to get into farming today unless you do inherit it from your parents, because the cost of the machinery and the land is beyond most people's ability to do. So who picks up the slack? Giant agribusinesses. And you're going, well, so what's the deal with that? Well, the problem with that is when you have millions of farmers, you've decentralized the power over the food supply. When you have only a handful of farmers, as in giant corporations running farms, it suddenly centralizes the power over the food supply. And there's other interesting things about it. Well, let me give you one. For as long as there's been farming, what do farmers do? Well, they save the seed from the best crops, the best plants in the crop, and then they replant those seeds the next year. And they keep doing that. And all of a sudden you have a super crop of whatever it is you're growing that's acclimated to your soil, because you take the best plants each year and keep taking the seeds and replanting them. Well, that's very difficult to do now because the seeds are all controlled for the most part by giant corporations like Monsanto and others. And so now when you buy the seed, it has in it, genetically engineered in it, what's called the terminator gene. So when you plant the plant, if you take the seeds from this year's crop and try to replant it next year, they'll just die. Why? Because they want you to have to buy seed again. Get it? And so as a result, there are certain seed companies, like one that pops in my head is Seeds of Change, that are hanging on to heirloom crops. In other words, they've not been genetically altered. Not that there's a problem per se with genetic alteration. It's just some of the uses are a little scary. And so there you can still buy original seed and you can replant your seed every year. But, these are small companies and it's getting increasingly expensive for any farmer who wants to do that. The other thing that's genetically implanted in the seeds is resistance to herbicides and fungicides. So to give you an example, in some of my property, I rent to a farmer, and I notice when he plants soybeans, for example, he comes out and he checks the soybeans and see how they're doing. And all around the little soybean plants, there's weeds everywhere. And then all of a sudden he comes in, and when there's about 4 or 5 leaves in the soybeans, that's his signal that it's time to spray. And so he sprays the entire field, and it kills everything but the soybeans. Why? because they've been genetically engineered with an herbicide and a fungicide resistant so that the weed killer will not kill those plants. So one day I'm watching him, I went down and talked to him. I said, so how's this working so far? I said, because I notice after you spray, there's still some weeds that are thriving. He said, here's the interesting thing. He said, it's just like what some people warned. He said that the ability to resist the herbicide is spreading to the weeds themselves. And this was something that was argued can't happen. See, coming, that's not going to happen. Well, it is happening. So he said, there's more and more weeds that are not eradicated by the weed killer anymore because they picked up on the genetic resistance that was in the soybeans. The weeds themselves have picked it up, which is exactly what people who oppose some of these uses of genetic engineering have said. Now, having said that, there's some wonderful uses of genetic engineering. So all the hybrid plants we have today, or for example, in many parts of the world, like in Asia, for example, many of the kids suffer blindness because of a lack of vitamin A in their diet. And so they engineered what's called golden rice that has vitamin A genetically engineered into the rice because it's not normally there. So when the kids eat the rice, they're getting vitamin A. Okay, who else is valuable to say? How about teachers? What do teachers get paid? They're teaching the kids, your kids. They're preparing our kids for the future. What do they get paid? School teachers get paid middle-class wages. Nobody goes into teaching thinking he or she is going to become a millionaire, and they're teaching our kids. And the worst part is in a lot of school districts, it's still the case in Pennsylvania, which has yet to reform property taxes as being at least half the cost of education or providing half the revenue for education. So the ironic part is every time it's time for the contract for the teachers to be renewed, the parents who are supposed to be working closely with the teachers and educating their children realize, well, if their contract goes up, we're going to get slapped with more property taxes. So all of a sudden there's an animosity between the two factions. And then as soon as the contract's approved, now you're supposed to be friends again and work with the teachers. So it's a crazy setup here in Pennsylvania where we still have property taxes providing much of the revenue for education. Okay, so that's middle-class wages. How about professors? Well, if you're a professor at a big university and you're publishing lots of books and doing lots of research, yeah, you're going to make a lot of money. Millionaire might be pushing it, but yeah, they're going to make hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they get well rewarded in their salaries as well. Now, they also only teach 2 courses because the other 2 courses, they only teach 2 courses a semester because they're supposed to be doing research and publishing and all that. And I know a lot of times students want to go to some big university for their graduate education, and more power to them. But partly the reason is because they have all these notable professors, and this one wrote this book and this one wrote that book, and then they go there and I'm actually going to have classes with that person. No, you won't. That's going to be taught by a grad assistant in that teacher's name. Yeah, the course is organized by the teacher, but you're never going to see that person in the classroom. Here, good, bad, or indifferent, you get the living legend face to face, or at least through these presentations. So yeah, you should be real happy you're going here to Cedar Crest College. This is all a matter of record, Okay, now professors at small colleges like Cedar Crest, and this is not unique to Cedar Crest, this would be true of Moravian or Muhlenberg, DeSales. We have to teach 4 courses a semester, and we don't get the hefty paychecks people do at big universities. And we're also expected to do research and other forms of community service, perhaps not the extent of research that people at big universities are supposed to, but nevertheless, yeah, that's part of the agenda. You're also expected to do research. And we get, again, not complaining, just saying this is how it works. It's middle-class wages, or perhaps at the best upper middle-class wages, and professors all the time are accused of just being in an ivory tower and they don't realize what's going on. The other day, as a matter of fact, I was saying to my personal servant, Arturo, as he was putting toothpaste in my toothbrush for me, You know, Arturo, the typical professor's just out of touch with the average, you know, man. Uh, More toothpaste, Arturo. Come on, step it up. Yes. Okay, what else? How about here's my favorite is childcare workers. Okay, so we have to work. Who takes care of our kids? Childcare workers. They are literally raising our kids for us. And how much do they get paid? Minimum wage at best. You know, like, are you serious? That's it? You know, they get minimum wage to raise our kids for us. How about ministers, rabbis, imams? What do they get paid? They get paid. They're not supposed to get paid at all. The theory is you're a spiritual worker. You know, that's enough. You know, and so we'll give you. You know, we may pay for your house if you're a minister or something, but that's it. You know, and you're not going to get a lot of money. And you're saving souls. You know, so why are you supposed to take a vow of poverty if you're a rabbi or you're a minister or a priest? Like, why? You know, oh, because you're saving souls. That's, you know, money shouldn't have anything to do with that. I see. So I gave you some great examples of jobs that are clearly valuable to American society, and yet they get paid next to nothing. You know, how about garbage collection? If we didn't collect the garbage, I mean, go back to medieval cities or even cities at the turn of the century here, when garbage wasn't collected, they began to realize diseases became rampant and rats were everywhere. Kind of like New York City today, even though they do collect the garbage, and the rats are partly, some of them are on the city council. Little political humor there. Apparently, very little political humor there. Anyway, what do garbage collectors get paid? You know, they're kind of looked down on by society, and yet they serve an incredibly valuable, necessary function for us all in preventing disease and keeping the rats down. And so where they should be getting paid a lot to collect the garbage, and it's a low status job. Anyway, so what jobs do get paid the most in society? By category: sports stars, celebrities, and CEOs of giant corporations. That's who makes the most money. Could we live without celebrities and sports stars? Sure. I love the arts. I love sports, but should they be getting paid millions and millions of dollars? And they make even more money on product endorsements than they make on their contracts. That's the key. The key is the endorsements. Why? Because we are such dopes. We'll go, well, because LeBron says this is a good product, it's good enough for me. I trust LeBron. He knows a lot about products. He's a sports star. The hell yeah, he knows a lot about this product because they're being paid. They're paying him to say it's a good product. No one was stupid enough to buy into it because he says so. Wow. Anyway, so yeah, that's who makes the most money in our society. The whole thing is bass backwards, folks. Okay, to give you another example, the highest paid corporate leader was earned enough last year. The highest CEO, the highest paid CEO, earned enough last year that it would be equal to that which a minimum wage worker would earn if he or she worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 38,000 years. That's right. So work hard enough, you can make that much too, and live long enough. All right. In 1960, this shows you how things have changed. In 1960, the average chief executive officer, CEO, made 41 times the average worker's wage. By 1993, it was up to 131 times. And today, it's 365 times the average worker's wage. So it went from 41 times, let's see, 60 years ago. Now it's 369 times, depending on whose statistics you look at. The highest paid CEO in 2017 was Larry Ellison of Oracle. He received $78.4 million in salary, bonuses, and stock options in just 1 year. The highest paid CEOs average $30 million each in earnings. Some of this is based on laws. Let me go back to Oracle's CEO making that much money, 78 million in 1 year. Corporation Oracle, the shareholders rejected this exorbitant pay package. This is out of control. But that made no difference under United States law because Ellison controls the board. In Australia, by contrast, shareholders have the right to force an entire corporate board to stand for re-election if 25% or more of a company's shareholders vote against the CEO pay plan 2 years in a row. As a result of this law, Australian CEOs are paid an average of only 70 times the pay of the typical Australian worker compared to 369 times that in the United States. And how did those laws come to be in the United States? I think you can figure out who made sure those laws were in place to keep the rich rich. Okay, John D. Rockefeller, how did he make his money? Rockefeller. Yes, that's correct, oil. Going back to the 1900s, he was the first oil baron. Did you know the first oil well, or where oil was first discovered, was in Pennsylvania? That's correct. Anyway, John D. Rockefeller then became Standard Oil, then it became Esso, then it became Exxon, and now they merged with Mobil, so it's Exxon Mobil. So that's the Rockefeller family. John D. Rockefeller, the founder of the icon of the family, said to a Sunday school class, "The growth of a large business is merely the survival of the fittest." Then a little kid raised his hand and said, "What about love thy neighbor?" See, it was a Sunday school class. Karl Marx said, "The ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class." So this gets back to ideology. We all think it's fair. Why? Because the ideas that we all go by are those that are favored by the ruling class and keep the ruling class as ruling class. So we actually believe that everybody who's rich earned it. They justify it. I'm not saying they didn't, but then somehow we don't earn it. We don't merit that. Okay, you also need to know on page 290, Melvin Tuman's critical analysis of the Davis-Moore thesis, much of which we've already discussed here, or at least I've talked about. Number one, he said it's questionable how we assess the importance of a particular occupation. For example, some professions purposely restrict their numbers to drive up their salaries. So in other words, if there's a limited supply of nurses or social workers, that means there's a high demand for that limited supply, which drives up the salaries. And that's exactly what nursing and social work professions have done. And there's a questionable relationship between rewards and the contribution that profession makes to society, as we just went over. Two, the caste elements of social stratification can prevent the development of individual talent through unequal educational opportunities for the poor and enhanced educational opportunities for the wealthy. Three, living in a money-focused society, we tend to overestimate the importance of high-paying job, for example, a currency trader, and underestimate the importance of low-paying jobs, parenting. The best thing I think it's a really interesting point is that why do we not consider parenting to be a job? How often have we said it all comes down to the parents? How do they raise these kids? We all talk about how the main function of the family is socialization. So how important that is to society. And so we don't even think of parenting as a job. All of the way do you have kids, or those of you who have kids know it's a job. It becomes a priority that occupies a great deal of your time. Not saying in a regretful way, it just is the way it is, if you want to raise your kids and raise them well. And so, why isn't it a job? And so when I was in graduate school, one of my professors, and actually took this to Washington, of course it went nowhere, she was trying to create, her name was Martha Ozawa, Dr. Ozawa, she was trying to create what's called parents' wages. And so the idea would be, if you have preschool kids, we'll pay you to stay at home and take care of your kids, right? And so now we may require you to have some training on how to raise a kid because most of us have no freaking clue. And so you learn how to raise a kid, and then having raised the kid, not carry around a Betsy Wetsy doll, actually get training in how to raise children and do so well. And if you pass the training course in high school, whatever, then you're eligible for the parents' wages. And then, because why instead go to work and pay somebody minimum wage to take care of your kids for you, as we do now with daycare? Yeah, why not just pay the parents directly? Anyway, and then once the kids reach school age, now your parents' wages expire because now they can go to school and you can go to work. See, the reason why we don't do this is it's way too rational and reasonable. Number 4, by suggesting that social stratification benefits all of society, the Davis-Moore thesis ignores how social inequality promotes conflict and even revolution. Let me give you another example of somebody who's successful. Elvis, the king, has been dead since 1977 and last year earned $50 million. That's right, he's dead and earned $50 million. That's more than maybe 50 of us will earn in our lifetimes, and he's dead and earns that in 1 year. Hey. Okay, page 291 is the social conflict analysis of stratification and conflict. Again, you'll see this is very similar to Melvin Tuman's rebuttal and some of the material we just talked about. Two major classes in society, as you know, the capitalists, the bourgeois, and the workers, the proletariat. These two classes account for all differences in wealth, power, and social standing, and it's self-perpetuating. Much of the potential talent and ability in society through the workers is never realized and utilized because of a lack of resources, opportunities, and differences in rights and privileges. These differences in social resources then serve the interests of the capitalists while simultaneously harming the interests of the workers. Marx and Engels wrote, the small tradespeople, shopkeepers, and retired tradespeople generally, the handcraftsmen and peasants, all these sink gradually into the proletariat. Henry Ford, remember him? I gave you an example of Henry Ford in my first presentation. Started Ford Motor Company, the assembly line. If you ever work in an assembly line, it can be mind-numbing, particularly the old school assembly lines, where your job all day long was you put on the widgets and the next person tightens the widgets. So for 40 hours a week, that's all you do. You just stand there and put on the widgets, put on the widgets, put on the widgets. Your job, tighten the widgets, tighten the widgets, tighten the widgets. But that assembly line is highly efficient. It's just mind-numbing work for the people who are on the assembly line. Well, Henry Ford, now listen to how condescending this is. Talking about assembly lines, which he developed. He said, repetitive labor, the doing of things over and over again and always in the same way, is a terrifying prospect to a certain kind of mind. It is terrifying to me. I could not possibly do the same thing day in or day out. But to other minds, perhaps I might say to the majority of minds, repetitive operations hold no terrors. Oh, I see. For us dumbass sheep, repetitive labor, because we're just dumbasses. We don't have no problem for you guys, but for me, yeah, I couldn't do that shit all day. Good enough for you people, though. Well, because the interests of the workers are always opposed to the interests of the owners, eventually this causes social instability as it reproduces the class structure each generation, then eventually social conflict, and finally the prediction was the social change, which was the overthrow of capitalism. Thus for Marx, social stratification is neither natural or is it inevitable. It's just something we create. Marx favored an egalitarian society. Egalitarian is from the word equal. Well, arguably, a key criticism of Marx's theories, in addition to the rest of the critical evaluation in the text, is that there has been no Marxist revolution. Like, okay, he wrote this in what? Communist Manifesto, 1850s. Where's the revolution? You know, it's been quite some time, Carl. What's the deal with that? And this is called the failure of what's called the polarization thesis. Polarization meaning the two sides are polarized, the workers and the capitalists. Neo-Marxists, in other words, contemporary Marxist theorists, have attempted to resolve this problem through global dependency theory, which we'll get to in chapter 12, which says that the polarization has not occurred within capitalist societies as it has between wealthy nations and the poor nations of the world. So we'll visit that when we get to that chapter and see whether or not that's in fact true. Okay, so on page 292, you need to know for the exam, why no Marxist revolution? Okay, number one, the fragmentation of the capitalist class. In other words, we're not united as a class. Remember, Marx said, until the people unite as a class, the workers unite as a class, they'll never overcome the capitalist order. So the fragmentation of the capitalist class, the division of it. Why? Because 50% of us own stock in the U.S., so the class in U.S. corporations, and so the class is diluted, and so people have a stake in capitalism. We got to keep it going. After all, I got stocks in corporations. Okay, so 50% of us have stock. You think, well, my parents don't have stock. They do if they have a retirement account, because retirement accounts invest in corporations. All retirement accounts have to, because if they don't make money, they won't have enough money to pay you when you retire, because the cost of living continues to go up every year. And so, for example, what did I read? $1 in 1900 is worth 5 cents today, just to give you an example. So anyway, if you are a teacher, the teachers union in Pennsylvania invests all that money, and they in stocks, in bonds, in corporations. And so that's why they say 50% of us own stock in the US, even if it's not directly, it's through your retirement account. However, having said that, the other 50% is owned by 1% of the population. Which 1% do you think that is? Yeah, that's right, the top 1%. Think about that. 1% of the population owns half of all the stock in the United States. So you think I was kidding when I said that? Isn't it interesting how corporate laws tend to favor the rich in the United States because they have disproportionate wealth, which means disproportionate amounts of political power in Washington and in state capitals. A second reason why no Marxist revolution, a higher standard of living. Most U.S. workers are white collar, and they are better off than blue collar workers were in 1900. In other words, we kind of bought the farm. You got your car, you got your big screen TV, you got cable. You get a couple of weeks off a year where you can take some vacation. And so, why overthrow the capitalist system? You're living large. 3, there's more worker organizations. Worker management disputes are handled without threatening the system, but in fairness, this is a result of class conflict. So prior to when unions were legally protected in organizing, which was in the 1930s, prior to that time, in the early 1900s, when I'd read about railroad workers and mining work. I mean, look at mines. Mines are not terribly safe today. They were horribly unsafe in the past. And if you work in a mine, you absolutely were going to get black lung and not live very long because of inhaling all the coal dust. And so that was the life of a coal miner. So no wonder they go on strike. And at that time, most of the country was using coal, not only in industrial capacities, but to heat their homes before oil came on stream. And so coal miners would go on strike all the time trying to get better wages. Go read about a coal miner's life in northern Pennsylvania. You realize what a scam it was, for the owners in terms of how they took advantage of the coal miners, the workers. Anyway, um, so they would try to organize, or like the Bethlehem Steelworkers try to organize. And what would happen is they would bring in the case of Bethlehem Steelworkers, the owner of Bethlehem Steel actually brought in the Pennsylvania State Police, whose nickname was the Cossacks, like the Cossacks in Europe in uh, back in Attila the Hun's time. But anyway, brought in the Cossacks to stop the strike. Now, think about that. How does the owner of a corporation bring in the people's police, the state police, to stop a strike at his private corporation? Like, come on, that's so wrong. And in that confrontation, a steel worker got killed. So, because working in steel mines or steel factories was also incredibly dangerous. People getting killed and maimed all the time. And so, because there was no workplace safety laws at that time, like OSHA. So, as a result, it was routine that whenever the workers strike, they get beat up by, mercenaries hired by the owners to prevent them from organizing. Why? Because if they organized, they might get higher wages, and God forbid the owners didn't want to have to pay that. So, starting in the 30s, as a result of this class conflict between workers and owners, unions had the right to legally organize without owners being able to stop them from doing so. And that's what drove wages up. Now, starting around 1970 is when that began to change, and wages flattened in the United States. And you will also see that that's commensurate with union membership dropping precipitously all around the country. Okay, 4, there's more extensive legal protection of the workers, as well as their social welfare programs like Social Security that provide more, and Medicare that provide more financial security for retirees. Arguably, though, ordinary people still face hardships that the law just can't overcome. Once again, check out the table on page 295 where the 3 paradigms approach to social stratification is summarized. The last thing you need to know for this chapter appears on page 296, figure 11-2, the Kuznets curve. Take a look at that a moment. I'll wait. That's enough waiting. The Kuznets curve shows the historical pattern portrayed by Lenski, technology, shows the historical pattern portrayed by Lenski and how technological sophistication is generally accompanied by more pronounced social stratification. Okay, so note that with industrial societies, the tremendous power and caste-like inequality of the elites in agrarian societies is eroded by greater opportunity and political rights for more people that formerly was associated with industrial societies. So as a result, you see that inequality drops with industrial societies as more and more people across society enjoyed more and more prosperity. Thus, the trend toward more pronounced social stratification is reversed in industrial societies compared to agrarian societies. However, check out the dotted line, which shows that inequality is becoming sharply more pronounced in post-industrial societies compared to industrial societies. Okay, so going back to many editions of this book, that dotted line portrayed accurately what we're seeing today, that the inequality between the rich and poor, and actually between the rich and the rest of society, continues to get greater and greater and greater by the day. So that dotted line was an accurate prediction of what was going to happen and what is in fact happening, that inequality is on the rise in post-industrial societies. Global Map 11-1 portrays income inequality in global perspective. Hey, everybody, that's all we got for today for Chapter 12. See you next time with Chapter 13 presentation. Bye.